vote today does not in any way diminish the United States' steadfast and unparalleled commitment to the security of Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East. We would not have let this resolution pass had it not also addressed counterproductive actions by the Palestinians.
That is our ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, today after the abstention from the vote. Let's bring in our panel, Jonah Goldberg, senior editor at National Review, Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist, Charles Lane, opinion writer for The Washington Post, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. And to anyone who thought it was going to be a quiet holiday week of news, it's definitely not been the case. Jonah, what do you make of this? Because what Ambassador Power said is this doesn't diminish the U.S. Steadfast and unparalleled commitment to the security of Israel. That's not how Israel's interpreting this.
That's not how basically any observer is interpreting this. This is like me punching someone in the face. It's me saying I'm not punching you in the face. Of course, this diminishes America's steadfast support for Israel. What I think is the most remarkable thing about this is that this is to no productive end. We've spent 8 years listening to a lot of supporters of Israel, a lot of liberal Jewish supporters of Israel, insist that Barack Obama is unparalleled in his support for Israel. And he's going out the door, flipping a middle finger to Israel for no apparent purpose. And if you listen to Ben Rhodes, you will listen in vain for a coherent answer to why they're doing this. And I think what this does is reveal that all along the rhetoric and posturing towards Israel concealed where their emotional heart is, which is they've always thought this was about the settlements, and this is a way to, and they held off doing this earlier because they knew it would hurt Hillary Clinton. Now that Hillary's gone, they're doing it simply out of spite and out of a sense of sort of emotional commitment to screwing Israel.
Yeah, and to be clear, we are one of the few who had veto power over this, so it never went anywhere at all, and the U.S. Affirmatively chose not to do that. We do have a little bit of audio from the phone call with Ben Rhodes this afternoon explaining what had happened and why. Here's a bit of that.
The Israeli government wants the conversation to be about anything other than the settlement activity. We've been warning President Obama and Secretary Kerry publicly and privately for years that the trend line of settlement construction and settlement activity was just increasing Israel's international isolation.
And while a lot of people would argue this resolution also isolates Israel, I mean, moves to that end.
Yes, and this, if anything, gives false hope to Palestinians. This doesn't actually change our policy. It won't change in a few weeks. We'll have returned to what our position of strong support of Israel has been for 40 years. But it'll give false hope to Palestinians. They will think that this gives them claim to something. It could lead to more violence. And showing this kind of moral cowardice and abstaining on this vote, not supporting this democracy, is a perfect coda to 8 years of foreign policy bungling and impotence.
Well, we got this tweet, of course, today, Chuck. I know you're not surprised. There is a tweet from Donald Trump saying, as to the UN, things will be different after January 20th. It's something that Israeli leaders are embracing and celebrating and noting in all their reactions to this vote today.
Well, yeah, I mean, just to pick up on a couple of the points, this does change something real. It changes international law. Security Council resolutions are international law, and that's a tremendous weapon now in diplomacy that the Palestinians can wield.
But apparently, my understanding, unless I'm getting this wrong, is that there are no sanctions that would be imposed on Israel.
No, but the declaration of what's legal and illegal in the name of the Security Council is extremely important for propaganda purposes, for legitimizing people who might try to make private sanctions like the boycott, divest movement.
Also, the International Criminal Court can play into this too.
But just to pick up on the point about what I think is fascinating in terms of the domestic politics of this, just as you said, the Israelis are now kind of openly placing their hopes in a Republican president coming in and crying betrayal at a Democratic president. We have come a long way in this country from the time when support for Israel was a bipartisan, almost unquestioned bipartisan thing. And now you are seeing not just a split between the parties, but you will soon see a split within the Democratic Party that will be provoked by this step, because President Obama has thrown, and John Kerry have thrown their weight behind the voices that have been insisting for a long time within the Democratic Party for a tougher, quote-unquote, policy on Israel that will put a lot of pressure on the pro-Israel forces within the Democratic Party, some of whom have been heard from such as Chuck Schumer, Ron Wyden, and Sherrod Brown in the Senate today.
And we just got something in from Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, formerly of the DNC, heading up the DNC. She said, I condemn the strongest of terms the United Nations Security Council's passage of what she calls this one-sided anti-Israel resolution, as well as the United States' reckless abstention. So bipartisan condemnation, Charles.
What happened today is that the United States joined the jackals at the UN. That was a phrase used by Pat Moynihan, the great Democratic senator, the former U.S. ambassador, who spoke for the United States standing up in the UN and to resist this kind of disgrace. To give you an idea of how appalling this resolution is, it declares that any Jew who lives in the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem, the Jewish quarter inhabited for 1,000 years, is illegal, breaking international law, essentially an outlaw, can be hauled into the International Criminal Court or into national courts in Europe, which is one of the consequences. The Jewish quarter has been populated by Jews for 1,000 years. In the War of Independence in 1948, the Arabs invaded Israel to wipe it out. They did not succeed, but the Arab Legion succeeded in conquering the Jewish quarter. They expelled all the Jews. They destroyed all the synagogues and all the homes. And for 19 years, no Jew could go there. The Israelis got it back in the Six-Day War, and now it's declared that this is not Jewish territory. Remember, it's called the Jewish quarter, but it belongs to other people, and any Jew who lives there is an outlaw. That's exactly what we supported. The resolution is explicit in saying settlements in the occupied territories and in East Jerusalem.
It does. But what my question is, why now? I mean, the Obama administration is about to leave. And
yes, because he didn't.
But there's been this very tenuous public cooperation between Obama and Netanyahu, although we always hear behind the scenes they don't like each other personally, or that there are issues that they disagree on. But publicly, they've stayed united. So why now, with 3.5 weeks to go, do you blow that up?
In 2012, running for re-election, Obama spoke at the meeting of AIPAC, the big Jewish lobby, and he said, is there any doubt that I have Israel's back? That's why he didn't want to do it while he was in office. That's why he didn't want to do it in 2016, so it would injure Hillary and show to particularly American Jews who tend to be Democratic that it was all a farce. He does it on the way out, and that's part of why it's so disgraceful. He hid it until there'd be no consequence, and now he's out the door and the damage is done for years. That resolution cannot be undone.
Well, let me bring up a real quick point, and then Joan, I want to get to you. I talked with Senator Graham today, who chairs the subcommittee that controls UN funding, and he was, talking very tough about he's going to do everything he can to block their funding unless this is rolled back or use it as some kind of leverage.
Yeah, I think that points to an important dynamic. This is going to set off a war between Congress and the United Nations that's going to have ramifications for a long time to come. But I also say there's a bizarre irony to this, in that everyone tells us that Bibi Netanyahu and Barack Obama don't like each other. This is a gift to Bibi Netanyahu. It's terrible for Israel. But what this does is it allows Bibi Netanyahu to say persuasively, even to his domestic critics, look, I've been telling you for 8 years, I haven't ruined the relationship with America. It's all because of Obama. And now Obama shows his true colors, and Bibi can say, look, I was right.
Well, and he'll have some backing now and help from Senator Graham and others. I mean, what do we make of this accusation by Senator Tom Cotton and others who have said to me, and probably to some of you too, that this was specifically orchestrated by President Obama and John Kerry?
Well, the Israelis have been saying that for some time, and they say this was all done behind their back, et cetera, et cetera.
But our own lawmakers
yeah, well,
the White House of doing it.
I'm not sure Tom Cotton was privy to all these conversations. I'm sure he's been briefed by sources in Israel who've been telling that to everyone. I must say I'm struck by the disconnect here. Look what's going on in the Middle East. 500,000 people have been slaughtered in Syria. You have war all over Yemen. Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapon. And the issue that the United Nations Security Council is focused on here a couple days before Christmas and Hanukkah is this.
Is Jews living in the Jewish quarter. It tells you how perverse the UN is and why it's time we cut the cord and stop giving them any money.
Yeah, we'll see if Senator Graham gets his way. That's what's going to happen.
Welcome to Hannity. President Obama stabbing Israel in the back on his way out of office. I'm Eric Bolling in for Sean tonight. Former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, John Bolton, is fired up and will be here in just a moment with reaction. But first, in what many are calling the ultimate betrayal in America's alliance with Israel, the Obama administration earlier today allowed the United Nations to pass a resolution condemning Israeli settlements in East Jerusalem and the West Bank as, quote, a flagrant violation of international law. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is reacting by saying, quote, Israel rejects the shameful anti-Israel resolution at the UN and will not abide by its terms. Netanyahu adding, quote, the Obama administration not only failed to protect Israel against this gang up at the UN, it colluded with it behind the scenes. And President-elect Donald Trump is responding by tweeting this, quote, as to the UN, things will be different after January 20th. Here now with reaction is former U.S. Ambassador to the UN and Fox News contributor John Bolton. Thank you, Ambassador Bolton. Wow, big day at the UN. So tell us, do you think that the UN Security Council colluded with the Obama administration to bring this vote today?
Well, I think certainly the sponsors of the resolution, the Egyptians, some of the others, some of the 5 permanent members of the Council, including Great Britain, obviously had to consult with the Obama administration to tell them what was in the resolution so that it was sufficient for Obama to order an abstention. The United States could have killed this resolution by voting no. It did vote no on a very similar resolution in 2011. But this was, and you said it exactly right at the top of the show, this was a stab in the back against the Israelis. It was entirely predictable. I would say this for people in the pro-Israel community in the United States who defended Obama's Middle East policy over these last 8 years. You should have seen this coming, and this is what you get for supporting Barack Obama.
Yeah, and this is a shot, I guess, it's at Israel, but also President Obama had a pretty contentious relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, I think it goes beyond the personal. I really think this was an effort to box the incoming Trump administration in, and it violates nearly 50 years of American bipartisan policy on the Middle East, going back to the iconic Resolution 242 after the 1967 war, which established the principle of land for peace. This resolution says basically Israel's occupation is illegitimate, therefore it has no land to give back in exchange for peace. Contrary to what the Obama administration has said, this puts a huge thumb on the scale against Israel. It does go to final status. It does affect Israel's security. It undermines it in profound ways. The consequences of this resolution are going to be felt for many, many years, all negative on Israel and substantially negative on the United States itself.
And let's be clear, there was quite a bit of bipartisan pushback to the U.S. abstaining from this veto. In other words, they could have vetoed it, they could have killed the resolution. They didn't, and when you think of on the right, Paul Ryan, John McCain, the list goes on. Even on the left, Chuck Schumer said the United States should have vetoed this resolution.
Yeah, they should have been, particularly in the Democratic Party, clearer on this going back for a long, long time. This subject of what Barack Obama might do with respect to Israel during the post-election, pre-inauguration period has been the subject of discussions that I've participated in for 2 years or more. It was entirely foreseeable, and now we see the consequences.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Israel's response. Now, will Israel change any policy? Will they stop building? Will they stop developing? Will they stop settling?
Not a chance, and nor should they. I tell you, this I do think, actually, contrary to what Obama said, is the death knell of the so-called two-state solution, because it shows, once again, it is fundamentally unworkable. And I think Netanyahu and a nearly unanimous Israeli public opinion will support him on that. With respect to the United States, I think it's time to stand up for a principle I've certainly advocated for a long time, which is votes in the United Nations should have consequences. We've got 2 issues here, the 14 countries that voted in favor of this resolution and the United Nations as a whole. Personally, what I would recommend to the President-elect would be, once he takes office, he should say this resolution is illegitimate and the United States is going to seek to repeal it. Now, if that fails, and that's the most likely outcome, we should cut our contribution to the United Nations. Perhaps in toto until this resolution is repealed.
This is an interesting concept, Ambassador Bolton. Right now, we account for somewhere around 20 to 22% of the total budget of the UN. So you're suggesting if the resolution isn't repealed, then we go ahead and pull the 20% of their budget?
Yeah, look, my experience with the United Nations, which goes back a long way, is that there are only two aspects of American power that are really respected in the United Nations. One is the veto in the Security Council, which Barack Obama threw away today, and the other is our money. I've personally engaged in telling specialized agencies in the UN and others that if something happens contrary to our wishes, we'll cut the money off. We have done that. I remember well in 1991, when the Security Council authorized the use of force against Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. Yemen voted no on that resolution. Jim Baker, Secretary of State in the U.S. chair at the Council, turned to those of us sitting behind him and said, that's the most expensive vote Yemen has ever cast, and we substantially eliminated their foreign aid budget. There are a lot of steps we can take here, and I hope the incoming Trump administration looks at all of them.
So I think it was 14-0 as a unanimous vote by the Council. Who would be the most affected? I guess Egypt represents the Arab League. Who would be the most affected if we do pull back or eliminate foreign aid to these countries?
Well, I think that's one option. I'm not necessarily saying we should do it in every case. There's some of these countries where we have no effective leverage now, like Venezuela. But, you know, people have talked about what our relationship with Russia might be. This shows, regardless of personal relationships, Russia is always prepared to shaft the Middle East, the United States in the Middle East. It's been doing it under Obama for 8 years. This is one more piece of evidence of it. It's just extremely distressing that even Great Britain didn't abstain on this resolution, and it shows just how much difficulty there is in the United Nations to try and carry out a coherent American foreign policy.
You bring up Russia. Talk to us a little bit about the back and forth that went down today. Vladimir Putin commended Donald Trump on his victory, gave him a pat in the back. He also sends him a letter, and Donald Trump tweeted, thank you. And tell us about that relationship. Is it that bad to have a good relationship with Russia?
Well, it's a question of what our national interests are compared to Russia's. And I think the exchange of comments today that's gotten the most attention has been on the nuclear front. And I think Trump was exactly right to say that he's not going to let the U.S. nuclear capability be second to anybody else, including Russia. The Obama administration has put us in I think, an inferior position with their misguided New START treaty, which was negotiated and ratified back in 2010, ratified, I'm sorry to say, with the support of a lot of Republican members of Congress. I think it's time to look again at that entire relationship. I don't think we should be negotiating bilateral strategic arms treaties with the Russians anymore. The world is a lot more complicated in nuclear terms than it was during the Cold War, when that was more sensible. And I think this goes to the review that our military needs to conduct of how to rebuild our deterrent capability in both conventional and strategic weapons urgently.
Okay, Ambassador, I only have about a minute or so, or a little less, but I think this is fantastic. President-elect Donald Trump says, you know what, we are going to be the #1 superpower in the world. And also, by the way, we get along with #2. It's not going to be a contentious relationship between the United States and Russia. That sounds like a good deal to me.
Well, if we can sustain it, a lot depends on Russia. If it stops military intervention in bordering countries like Ukraine, if it refrains from provocations in countries like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, if it pulls back from its really harmful intervention in the Middle East and some of its other activities, then I think we've got a basis for constructive discussion. But I tell you, one thing that my experience of negotiating with the Russians has shown is that if you show toughness to them, they respect it. They haven't seen that in 8 years.
All right, we're going to leave it right there, Ambassador Bolton. Thank you very much.